Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Guildhall. I'm Andrea Grover. I'm the Executive Director. We're thrilled to be bringing back the Hamptons Institute. It was founded in 2010 by our late chairman, Mickey Strauss, and Ellen Chesler, who is here tonight. Ellen, where are you? And it really goes to the roots of Guildhall. Guildhall was founded as an educational institution, truly a civic institution that's bookended by visual and performing arts. But in our founding purpose, it stated that the intention of Guildhall was to have an interchange of ideas that would lead to the betterment of society and also to create a quote-unquote finer type of citizenship. So this program really embodies the founding purpose of Guildhall. Thank you. Standing next to me is Patricia Duff of the Common Good. And while the Hamptons Institute was on hiatus for 6 years, when we decided to bring it back, I reached out to Ellen Chesler, the co-founder, and Patricia Duff of the Common Good. So they have co-curated this 4 Monday night series for us, and they've done an expert job. So Patricia, can you tell us about the
Yes, just a couple of words. Thank you, Ellen, for getting me into this. And we are so honored at the Common Good to be part of this incredible institution at Guildhall. The Common Good is all interested, our audience and our members. What we do is talk to some of the most important leaders in the country, some of the biggest experts, some of the most articulate and interesting people on the most important issues and events of the day. So I hope we do this in New York. A lot of it is also online. We invite you all to join us if you are in the city or want to join us online. And I hope you enjoy tonight's evening. I'm proud to be here. Thank you so much, Andrea.
Thank you, Patricia. So the series will continue every Monday night at 7 p.m. in July. So next week we have SNL, 50 Years of American Satire. The week after that we have Post-Play Childhood with Jonathan Hyde and Howard Koplowitz and Perry Peltz. And then the last week we have Order or Chaos, the Economy Under Trump. And just one last thing, most of our panelists are really giving of their time to be here with us, and we couldn't have done this also without the support of Lisa Rosenblum and Nina Rosenblum, so I want to thank them personally. So please welcome our panelists. Thank you so much.
Well, good evening, East Hampton. We're delighted to see you here. I'm Jim Zirin. Our program is called Guardrails on Democracy. The subject is really about something people are very disturbed about, which is the apparent decline in our civil liberties and the unusual and extraordinary accretion of executive power that we've seen since Donald Trump was inaugurated. It is something unprecedented in American history. Much of what he has done with his 143 executive orders is comically illegal. A lot of what he's done is just bad policy and violates presidential norms. So we have a terrific panel to help you unpack this issue, to understand it. And it's important that you are here so that you might understand it with us. So to introduce our panel, we have on my left, Norm Eisen. Norm is a professor of law. He is a super lawyer. You see him often on CNN discussing legal issues of the day, and he is someone uniquely qualified to talk about some of the recent legal issues involved in the subject matter. Then we have Susan Corke, who is the Executive Director of Democracy Defender Action, a think tank in Washington, D.C. And I suppose it is more than coincidence that her organization was co-founded by Norman Eisen. And last, and certainly not least, Anthony Romero, the Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union. His title his title speaks for itself, and he will tell you about some of the cases that the ACLU has brought. There are about over 300 cases that have been filed. Most of them are active. All of them challenge the executive orders issued by Trump. It is interesting to note, as almost as a footnote, that Trump's 143 executive orders top the 28 that he signed in the first 100 days of his first administration, 23 that Biden signed in the first 100 days of his, the 8 that Obama signed, and the 11 that George W. Bush signed. So this is really a banner year since January 20th. So we'll get on with the program, I guess, with a question. And my question is, for Norm, to kick things off, have you and have we really seen a decline in civil liberties in the United States since January 20th? And how would you plan to fight back?
Thank you, Jim. Thanks, Hamptons, for welcoming us. I want to thank Andrea and Patricia, also Ellen and Matt for all that they did to schlep us from Washington, D.C. I was lured here with the promise of a short vacation, and I've just worked the whole time. I think that to assess the state of civil liberties, first of all, nobody better than my friend and brother Anthony. He's one of the truly great leaders in our democracy movement, and Susan and I, Susan as the executive director, myself as the executive chair, manage the day-to-day at the Democracy Defenders Fund and our associated entities, Jim. And I think that there are three numbers that I would point you to. There's that 140-some Trump executive orders. And they represent an authoritarian attack on democracy of a kind, I won't say that we've never seen in this country, because this is a country, after all, where slavery was legal, was in the Constitution, where we fought a war over that. We had Reconstruction, and then we had the imposition of Jim Crow. And in some ways, we're still fighting the battles for equality in our nation. So strains of authoritarianism are familiar, but this is a new variety in the modern era. But to really, and those 100-plus Trump orders really are, many of them are a connect the dots of an authoritarian nightmare that bears more resemblance to the worst tragedies of the 20th century than it does to the American idea. But there's another number that's very important, and that is the number of 194, I think is the current New York Times count. 194 times that those illegal and unconstitutional and autocratic and wrong, bad, evil actions have been stopped by the federal courts. You know, Anthony and I are working on birthright citizenship together, Democracy Defenders and the ACLU. And we had the Supreme Court ruled, well, you can't get a nationwide injunction, but you can do class actions. We had our class action on file in 2 hours. So the story of the litigants and the courts are the other part of the story of where civil liberties are at in the United States today. And then the third number, we're a relatively new organization, Democracy Defenders Fund. We have a C4 action. We were founded on January 7th, 2021, after I finished fighting the battles that culminated, legal battles culminated in January 6th, because I believed, unfortunately, that authoritarianism was not going to vanish on the American scene. And between the civil, the criminal, the regulatory, the tax, the whistleblowers, the employment cases, we have over 100 legal matters in our little org just in the past 6 months. So I think that those numbers tell a tale of assault on civil liberties, but also of powerful pushback. And we'll talk tonight, it's not just litigation, it's all of the dimensions. And we'll talk about that tonight. I think which will win is up to all of you and everybody else out there across the country, just like this beautiful audience here tonight.
Or is it up to the supermajority on the Supreme Court, which modified the nationwide injunction when it was a question of birthright citizenship, but sat back idly during the Biden administration when it was a question of mephisterone, and they refused to, they certainly didn't disturb the nationwide injunction, even though they might have done it then. They might have done it under Obama. They didn't do it then. But now they don't like nationwide injunctions because it's which way the cheese cuts, isn't it?
They're terrible, and we have to address that. But you can't have a handful, 6 on the MAGA majority of the Roberts Court. They are not as powerful. We know from our study, you'll hear from Susan, she and I have worked on this domestically and internationally. If the American people are determined to hang on to their democracy, the Supreme Court, the Roberts MAGA majority, will not be able to stop them. And we'll talk about, I've used my words for the first question, but we'll talk about the ways that I'm optimistic that the American people and the American idea are bigger than these partisans, these 6 partisans.
Well, I feel like Diogenes, who went out with a lantern and found an optimist. Susan, tell us something about the work that you do. You're a non-lawyer, so you can explain it to people that are benefited by not having had a legal education.
Yes, well, I feel like I play a lawyer on TV, but yeah, we call our kind of theory of change with the organization the Court of Law and the Court of Public Opinion. And, you know, Norm and I have spent a lot of time both internationally and domestically. And when Trump came into power, we knew what we were facing, that we were facing the onset of authoritarianism. And while defending the rule of law is the critical first pillar, and authoritarians know that, which is why they immediately, you know, with his shock and awe campaign, you know, tried to overwhelm the system. We fought back. We were the first ones to launch the first lawsuit. But ultimately, the courts alone cannot save us. So the Court of Public Opinion is also incredibly important, and that is the other side of the equation for us. Norm and I together wrote the Democracy Playbook. It's been through a number of editions, but we did that by studying what has worked in other countries where democracy is eroding. The first half of my career, I spent it in places like Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Turkey, Poland, and Hungary. And the authoritarian playbook is very similar in each of those places. So in launching this new organization, we realized that there was a gap in the ecosystem in America because we hadn't faced this kind of authoritarian challenge in our history, really. And so we knew we had to be ready to file lawsuits. We spent all of last year planning, putting together networks of lawyers, building up the capacity of our organization, being ready to go with the threats that we knew were coming from Project 2025. But the other pillars that we also are fiercely defending are protecting elections. We are protecting media and civil society. We are countering corruption. And we are also needing to build back a path to show that democracy works and really fighting in the court of public opinion. Another thing we did at the beginning of the year is we launched The Contrarian. As we saw mainstream media bending the knee to the Trump administration, Jennifer Rubin and Norm called me over the holiday break over Christmas and New Year's and Jen said, I can't stay here. I've got to resign. What can we do? And we kind of rapidly, conspired and came up with the idea of launching The Contrarian, because we know another pillar that authoritarians go after, they know the power of public opinion. They know the power that information can have. And so we knew that we were going to need to create a channel for dissent, to be able to have critical voices out there that were challenging and holding the government to account and getting new voices into the conversation. So creating this court of public opinion, having our own channel was very important to us. Within that too, the solidarity of all of the nonprofit organizations that we have been working with has been one of the efforts that we've been helping to lead, and has been really heartening to see that they went after the law firms, and the law firms initially were not ready to band together, but the civil society network, once they started, we knew after Harvard that they would start coming for civil society next on similar pretext of going after our nonprofit status. We immediately organized with a couple of other organizations, Public Citizen, our organization, I think ACLU. The next day we had a call. We thought we'd get a couple dozen, couple hundred NGOs joining on to find out how we could band together in solidarity. We got 11,000 nonprofits from around the country banding together. And if that doesn't show you that our country is ready to fight, and that the people know that we have the power in a democracy and that we need to fight for it, the courts can only take us so far, which is not to say that that is not incredibly important, but I hope we get into a conversation about the power that all of us have, because I will say, and ending on my question, when we fight back, we can win. History has shown us that. We have seen it in the mobilization of the protests with No Kings, that when we fight back, the people have a lot of power. Donald Trump and his big bad bill that he passed are deeply unpopular. We can use that, we can mobilize against it, and we can unify, and that is the power of public opinion.
Well, and what specific methods do you use to communicate with the public and to get your message across? One question I'm asked by almost everyone I meet at a party in the Hamptons or anyplace else is, what can I do? What can we do about it? We're defenseless. What do you suggest that we do? And I don't have a ready answer. I'd like to say, call Susan, Corke, she'll tell me.
We've got a million ideas. One, subscribe to The Contrarian. We get a lot of voices coming in from there. But I'd say everybody within their communities, get involved in your local Indivisible chapter. Get involved in the protests. Another trend that's been heartening to me, just this year we've started to get thousands and thousands of people giving $10, $15, $20, signing up, asking what they can do. So the more that we're pushing out for space and seeking to build a bigger tent, it's not partisan anymore. It's not Republican versus Democrat. It's right versus wrong. It's humane versus cruelty. And us coming together under a unified big tent, showing up for the protests.
Do you work with immigrant defense organizations?
We do work with a fair number of them, and I'll let Norm talk a little bit more about that. But
We work with the #1 immigrant protection entity in the United States, the ACLU. The first call when we were getting ready was to Anthony, what can we litigate together? Because you're very fortunate, truly, as a movement, but all of us here tonight, to have him representing the ACLU. Nobody finer to fight side by side with.
Well, side by side, Anthony.
I don't need to say much. Norm is covering it perfectly.
Well, but litigation. That's you're in the litigation business, and
Yeah.
the end of the line for you is that 6-person supermajority on the United States Supreme Court, which appears to me to look like 6 North Korean generals telling Kim Jong-un, "You're a winner." How do you cope with that?
I'm going to make an optimist out of you yet. That is my goal tonight, Jim. But yes, the Supreme Court is a challenge. But let me back up for a second. Let me set the stage a bit differently and then get to your Supreme Court question. First off, I am just thrilled to be here tonight. It is just wondrous to be at Guildhall. I live not far from here. I walk by Guildhall on my walks, so I'm a hometown boy. I'm delighted to be here because of Ellen Chesler, who I cannot say no to, so I keep saying yes. And I'm heartened because look at this room. I mean, Jim, this will make you an optimist. It is Monday night in the Hamptons. The weather's perfect. There's lots to do, and this room is absolutely filled like the film festival. And that's because people really are engaged, concerned, thirsty for a sense of community, a sense of meaning, a sense of engagement. And I think it's a reflection of how bad it is. So I'm going to get to the bad, and I'll come back to the Supreme Court.
I think it's because we have a big, beautiful panel.
I think it's because we have a great moderator who's going to make sure you keep us honest. I want to be clear. I mean, even though I'm optimistic, and I'm a born optimist, I wake up optimistic, I also know that I'm a clear-eyed pragmatist. And what we're looking at is really something we have not seen in this shape or form for decades, at least. And it's often hard. People say, what's going on in this country, and how can you help us understand it? I have 3 buckets. And most of what I care about with the Trump administration, I can throw into one of those 3 buckets. Bucket number 1 is the targeting of institutions and individuals as if they were the enemies, the nemesis of the Trump ideology. So you throw in that bucket, Columbia, Harvard, right? You throw in the law firms. You throw in the student activists who are being deported or endeavored to be deported. All his efforts to kind of make enemies of individuals who do not agree with this government. A modern-day McCarthy, right? Bucket number 1. Bucket number 2 is the targeting of groups and communities who are politically weak to score cheap political points, right? This is red meat for the MAGA base, right? And there I throw in the attacks on transgender individuals, the attacks on immigrant communities, the attacks on people of color, the attacks on DEI. In the third bucket, I throw in the targeting of the norms and institutions that undergird a system of checks and balances, our democracy, right? And this is where Norm and Susan's work is so critical, because it's broader than civil liberties. I stick to the civil liberties lane. I don't swing at every pitch. I need other folks who will swing at other pitches. And so the ACLU's work is largely focused on civil liberties, civil rights, freedom of speech, First Amendment, immigrants' rights, due process, equal protection. But a lot of what's going on is also much more about the core system of checks and balances and the gutting of congressional authority. The way in which the Doge has tried to run roughshod over the agencies and really have cudgeled Congress into submission. The attacks on media, right? The shameful settlements from private media companies when they are paying the Trump administration money on cases they would win if they were courageous enough to file suit.
But that could be said of the law firms too.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I look at those three, and then I think, okay, now what's happening? What is the response? Litigation, we've already talked about it. 325 lawsuits all in, I think, that or at least on the one, the Just Security Tracker. Norm's got about 100 plus. We have about 130, and then 70 of them are class actions. So there's a full employment plan for folks like Norm and my lawyers, right? This is going to keep us busy and engaged, and we are winning many of them. This is where I want to come back to your 6-3 issue. And yet the litigation's not going to save us there, right? It's not going to take us there. Lawyers are not going to save us. It's going to be the public response that is increasingly growing in this moment. I think the other part I will say is that what is incredibly heartening is the fact that this is becoming an issue where ordinary people are engaging. These town halls that people are turning up to at their local elected officials, the kind of advocacy that's being done in local communities, the Know Your Rights trainings. You know, the ACLU, we did a Know Your Rights training, and we put it on our website. It's all in Spanish. It is the 4th most visited page of our website, right? A Spanish language Know Your Rights page where people are just downloading and sharing that information so that people know what to do if the police or the ICE turn up. And I think that is a signal that people are not just going to take this all lying down, but in fact they're willing to engage.
Well, Anthony, just to push you a little, the Trump administration, through executive order, claimed there was an emergency and imposed tariffs. And the Supreme Court has taken at least 20 of the Trump cases involving the Trump administration since January 20th on its emergency docket, which legal scholars call the shadow docket.
Right.
It's a shadow docket because in many cases they're like ICE agents. We don't know which justices have voted for what. They're masked. In almost all of the cases, there's no reasoning. We don't know how they got there. We don't know why they got there, except to say we're for Trump. Very dangerous from a jurisprudential point of view, and makes them really politicians in robes, enablers of the Trump agenda. And you're up against that, so you're going to win in the lower courts. And if you win in the lower courts, in birthright citizenship case, they said it was quite clear if they lose the case, they don't have to go to the court. And they say, well, the case is only binding on the plaintiff and in the place where the case was brought. And if your clients win the case, you're certainly not going to go to the Supreme Court. So that's it. And there's a gamesmanship going on here.
There is.
And the Supreme Court is playing the game.
They are.
And
the odds are stacked against us. I mean, we know it's 6-3.
So
it's always you have to count to 5. You know this, Jim. You cover this well in all of your books and columns. I mean, the place where I would push you to be a little bit more of an optimist. I know there is one deep down inside. I've had dinner with you, so I've seen it. I've seen glimpses of it at times. Of the two that the Trump administration lost, one of them was ours, was the Alien Enemies Act case, which is very telling, very important. This is a 1798 law that the Trump administration has invoked, saying that we have an invasion, and therefore we can summarily deport people, Venezuelans in this case. Of our clients are the Venezuelans, 130 men who were deported to the Gulag in El Salvador, saying that because of this invasion, we can deport them without due process. That one went up on the shadow docket, 7-2. Good lawyers can still win with the right theories, the right cases, the right clients, with the right kind of facts and circumstances. We won't win every one of them, but I think even in the shadow docket case of the Alien Enemies Act, where it was just basically, it was not yet on the merits. I mean, lawyers, we talk right hand procedural arguments, left hand substantive arguments. So this was mostly on the procedure, where you're talking about what type of due process should they be afforded. I am confident that when ultimately the Alien Enemies Act case comes back on the left hand, back on the merits, on the substance, we win that one. And the way that the justices were asking questions, I mean, it clearly, the last time we used the Alien Enemies Act case was World War II, right? Where we used that law to summarily remove Germans who were on our shore during that war. The Germans were given 30 days notice before we deported them. And in this instance, it's no war, and they're giving some of our clients less than 6 hours notice, right? With the notice being paper and English. And so ultimately, I think we prevail because it's just the extreme nature of these actions. On tariffs, I didn't litigate the tariffs case. I don't know, Norm, do we know who did?
We have a brief. We've been working on tariffs.
So do you want to talk about
That was the brief I was working on backstage,
Okay,
actually.
all right, then pick it up from there.
And
He was writing the brief outside. That's it.
dictating to my little phone. Siri is the greatest friend of democracy. My law partner, Siri.
Do you want to take a swing, Norm, at the three branches of government and the checks and balances?
I will. I'll expand a little bit on Susan and Anthony. I'll try to be succinct for the first time in my life. When you look at that record, I think it's more complicated than 18-2. We've had a number of cases that have gone up. We got a big injunction in California freezing the firing of tens of thousands of federal employees. And it ultimately went up to the Supreme Court after weeks in which folks were restored to their jobs. There were some parts of the relief that weren't touched by the court. And the court ultimately said, well, I don't think you have standing. I don't think the plaintiffs teed this relief up quite the right way. But they gave some suggestions, in their opinion, on how we should do it. Well, guess where we were the next morning? We were back in court following that opinion, back in federal court in San Francisco. By 5 o'clock, we had a new injunction, hasn't been touched. So the record, even if you look at that full Supreme Court docket, the shadow docket where they've considered about 20 cases, there's been another...
18 wins for Trump, 2 wins for Norm Eisen.
But there's been another, let's see, that's 20, 194. There's been another 174 cases that Anthony and we and our coalition have won that aren't touched. And you have a federal judiciary. Look at our case, Birthright. Supreme Court says no, probably no universal injunctions on the birthright citizenship case. The ACLU and Democracy Defenders had the very first one that was filed. 2 hours later, they said, but you can do class actions. And state AGs may have standing. And Administrative Procedure Act claims may have standing. Well, within 2 hours, we were back in court with a class action stating Administrative Procedure Act claims. So I think they're terrible. I've written we have to reform the court. There's no rule you have to have 9 people on the court. Historically, it's matched the number of judicial circuits. We could comfortably add 5 people to the court. Congress needs to be bold enough to undertake those judiciary reforms.
This Congress?
Democratic Congress. This Congress is not long for this world, Jim. If you're looking at the opinion polls, I refuse to let Donald Trump take away hope from us. Yes, it's a steep path, and the Supreme Court made the legal path steeper. Well, we'll just run twice as hard, and that's what we're doing. We just won another one today. AmeriCorps. Donald Trump shut down AmeriCorps as Susan and I were on our way here today. Preliminary injunction restoring the AmeriCorps functions to communities around this country. So I think that there are ample reasons, but what you heard from Anthony, what you heard from Susan is, ultimately it won't be up to the courts. The courts play a very important role. Ultimately, it's going to be up to the American people. Donald Trump cannot sufficiently dismantle this experiment if the American people turn out in large numbers in 25, New Jersey, Virginia, 26, and then 28. That's the fight. That's why we litigate. We're part of a coalition with the ACLU on election issues. Okay, that's why we have to focus on things like protecting our elections. So there's a fork in the road. Nobody knows which branch of the fork we're going to take. But I think the American people are going to take the democracy fork. Look at Donald Trump's polling numbers, most unpopular of any modern president at this point in their trajectory, with one exception: Trump won.
Well, I hope you're right. One of the phrases that's come up again and again is a class action. And in the birthright citizenship case, Justice Kavanaugh was very high on the class action. That's the way under our procedures we bind absentees to a judgment. He disregarded the fact that at the time of the founding of the Constitution, there was the Equitable Bill of Peace, where you could bind absentees to a judgment. Alito, of course, said, don't be too sanguine about a class action because I'm not so sure we should have nationwide injunctions under the class action concept, particularly where it involves the government, this government, Donald Trump. Who knows how they're going to come out on that one. But could you explain a little bit to everyone what the class action is all about? And maybe this is a question for Anthony, I'm not sure, but class actions to me is how you have a consumer's class action, or you have some sort of tort liability class action, accounting fraud. Now all of a sudden we're enjoining the government nationwide on using a class action.
So and let me see if I can break it down as well as I can. I have lots of friends in the audience, and a lot of them will not let me go over their homes if I talk too much legalese, Jim. I'm sorry. I know I'm going to try to...
Even among lawyers, the class action is not the most riveting dinner table topic.
So the Supreme Court, you're absolutely right. The Supreme Court in birthright citizenship, let's just set the table again, right? Birthright citizenship, for the Trump administration to come down with its executive order on day one, was its first executive order that he signed before he even put on the tuxedo to go to the balls, is really trampling on hallowed ground. Birthright citizenship is how we fixed America's original sin, chattel slavery. That is how we took the children of slaves and made them citizens. It is as hollowed a part of our country's history as anything we have. It is also the way in which this great nation of immigrants made sure that we are all equal under the law. If you're born here, you're one of us, period. And if you start putting rules about what was your parents' citizenship, you're going to create second-class citizens among your people. It will be another way of intergenerational stigma and discrimination being promulgated into the generations. That's why it was so significant for us. That's why we worked months before the inauguration to have that lawsuit ready. We filed it literally on Inauguration Day. Norm in his case, us in our case. Now, the Supreme Court decided, okay, we're not going to allow universal injunctions, right? It's too much legalese, right? They're basically saying one judge shouldn't be able to decide the outcome of all these policies all across the country. And the fact is, it's been a pox on both of our houses. I want to be very clear. The ACLU is not a Democratic organization, not capital D Democrat. We criticize the Democrats, we criticize the Republicans, we work with both. The idea that you could file one lawsuit in Texas with Judge Kaczmarek and hold Planned Parenthood by the tail, right, was wrong, right? We've all seen this. I know, Annette, you've seen this. And we've all been very concerned about one judge having too much power in any one courtroom. And so this was a problem. Now, they should not have fixed it in this particular case. I was at the Supreme Court. I watched the argument. The New Jersey Attorney General did a brilliant job. He's basically saying, look, my people from New Jersey, they go out of state, the kid is born early in a state that doesn't recognize citizenship. My residents, I have an interest in making sure that my residents' citizenships are recognized, right? So if that New Jersey couple's kid is born in Georgia, the New Jersey governor has an interest in it. That would have been a perfect case to say, yes, a universal injunction should have worked here. The court went out of its way to kind of say, we're going to strike it down. Maybe we'll give them a nationwide relief. Well, now they're litigating it again. And then we're filing a class action. Now, what do you do with class action? You have to have a group of individuals sufficiently cohesive, be able to define them as a class, to show the harm. They'll fight us tooth and nail. We're not new at this. We will fight them back. We know how to certify classes. We've been doing this for 105 years. The ACLU is, not I. I'm only 60 this week. Thank you very much. Yes? Not yet 105, but feeling like it with this administration. And I think that we will then live to fight another day on with these class actions. Ultimately, the other piece that I will say, Jim, that, you know, to bring the optimist out of you, is litigation is about taking time, right? It's about preserving the status quo. It's about throwing sand in the gears of that machinery, grind them down, make them play whack-a-mole. I sue them here, Norm and Susan sue them over there. Another group, Democracy Forward, sues them in Northern California. Another group, Protect Democracy, will sue them on the West Coast, in Oregon. That is all a collusion, I will say. It's not a criminal conspiracy. We are in touch with each other real time every day on our cell phones. We refer clients to each other, but we understand that all of us need to be making them run ragged. And so every inch that they gain should be hard fought for ground.
This is the doctrine of sue, baby, sue.
You bet.
Well, that
We refer to it as Trump flooded the zone. We did rule of law, shock and awe. And for every illegal act he took, it's about a little less than 150. There are more than 300 lawsuits. Literally, he got hit with 2 lawsuits for every illegal act he took. And that is a massive onslaught. And the vast majority of those injunctions have not been touched by the Supreme Court. And the proof is they've continued to pour out in the week or so since we got this very bad nationwide injunction case. It's not to say they're not awful. The MAGA majority of the Roberts Court are terrible. We must have court reform the next time we have a trifecta. We did not prioritize it. It was a mistake. In the prior administration, we had that trifecta. We must reform the court, but there's what to work with, together with political solutions, public mobilization, political leadership. There's more you can work with.
But let me ask Susan a question. On your research and your history overseas, what's happened to the courts in other contexts in which, how similar or different is this from other places where you've worked?
I mean, we are fortunate in this country that we have such a strong respect for the courts and the judges, that is an esteemed profession. When I was working in Russia, judges there were so envious of our system. We would take them on trips over to this country to show them, and they realized, oh my goodness, like being a judge is a really prestigious, important role that the public trusts. Like, we want some of that in Russia. You know, in Poland, that was, you know, the politicization of the judiciary was, you know, one of the, you know, really kind of devastating things that brought them down on a backward spiral, but people, you know, fought back, and that became one of the successes. But, you know, in other countries, and I think what was shocking for other countries as well, that we were coming under attack like this. But the tradition of our courts and the esteem that we hold our courts is, other countries look to us, and I hope that we can continue to kind of live up to that tradition.
That's part of the reason why the ACLU, we're technically two different organizations, the tax-exempt arm, the ACLU Foundation, and the political arm, the ACLU Inc., which is the lobbying arm. In the lobbying arm, we're prioritizing all the state Supreme Court elections for this reason, right? Where you can mobilize people and say, who you vote onto your state Supreme Courts is critically important. We all saw that big election where Elon Musk spent a fortune in Wisconsin and came out with, 0, right? It was wonderful. He spent 20 million. I think the ACLU, we spent about $1.5 million. And ultimately, I think when you show people why their local elected officials matter, especially local Supreme Court judges, almost half of the states, more than half of the states elect their state Supreme Court judges. Most people don't have the record of their state Supreme Court judges. In many of these states, they're not even identified by party. So they don't even know what their record is or what they're voting for or who the individuals are. So to provide people with real-time information and say, look, who you vote on these local courts really matters. And that's another way that we're also girding ourselves against the Supreme Court. I mean, unless you bring a federal claim under the Constitution, you have to be in federal court. A lot of state constitutions are really ripe terrain for civil liberties and civil rights cases, where if you don't raise a federal claim, you don't end up in federal court. The highest court on a state claim is the state Supreme Court. And if you play the long game and begin to invest money to flip some of these seats and populate these state Supreme Courts with more progressive individuals in the judges and as judges, and then you're also filing cases in the state Supreme Courts, that's a way that we get around some of the challenges.
If I could jump in on the Wisconsin Supreme Court race was incredibly important, and the timing was incredibly important too. After the election, I think there was a lot of malaise. People were not sure what to do, but the Supreme Court race with the majority of the Supreme Court in Wisconsin on the line in such a critical state, Elon Musk and Trump saw how important that race was. Musk was funneling $25 million into the race through dark money vehicles. I think a real test of our model too, we saw that this was a real opportunity for mobilization, that we needed a win. So we worked closely with folks on the ground. We did a lot of research figuring out, okay, here is where Musk is kind of breaking the law here. We filed ethics complaints. We then got the court of public opinion going, talking about this at the national level, having people understand this is a billionaire who is trying to buy this court away from the people of Wisconsin, and the people of Wisconsin do not want that. We worked with kind of trusted local voices and voters on the ground, and the people rose up and they said, you're right, we don't want a billionaire to buy our Supreme Court. This is our race. Get out of here, Musk. So that was kind of an important victory that I felt the momentum started to shift after that.
And we sued him.
We sued him.
We sued him, and we're still litigating against him. No more Musk lotteries. We're trying to put a stop to him with
God, I don't want to meet Norm in a dark alley.
or a well-lit alley.
If you're a friend, it's really great.
Now, Susan, just to get back for a moment to the foreign piece, because, of course, we got our law from England. The birthright citizenship case was heavily loaded with references to English law and the law of equity, which I think they misapplied. But I've spoken to English judges, including justices of the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom, and they are just appalled by the politicization of our Supreme Court. And they've met the justices of our Supreme Court and talked with them. They told me that they're appalled by the Dobbs case, a political answer to a legal question. The pretense that our Supreme Court is a disinterested, impartial tribunal that free of politics, that decides cases on the basis of law and precedent, I mean, is just a canard. It's not true. And we have to face that fact, and that's why I find it quite appealing that we need court reform, term limits, which can be done within the Constitution, and there has to be, I don't know whether we can reinstate the filibuster for the appointment of justices of the Supreme Court. It was the Democrats who repealed it, and these three justices came in under Trump 1. But clearly, something has to be done so that we get reasonable decisions out of the court. Not on the shadow docket, but well-reasoned decisions where they present their reasons, their opinions, and where we know who authored them, and we can see the dissenting arguments, and we can know who voted for what.
I 100% agree. I was actually, I was in Williamsburg for the 4th of July, and they recited they had Thomas Jefferson doing a reenactment of the Declaration of Independence, and William and Mary was, a British institution, Queen Mary, King William, and, I've been reflecting a lot on our history, but in ending the reenactment, Thomas Jefferson said, we've had 249 years of this experiment. We do not want to be the generation that lets this experiment fail. So, 100% that the courts and the judges and, the No Kings movement, and having that be kind of the mobilizing cry that we do not want to go back in time to our history. My husband is African American, and he said, you notice in no movies with African Americans are there time machines, because we know when you go back in time that it is not good for African Americans. And what the Trump administration is trying to do is bringing us back in time to the pre-civil rights movement, and that is what we are fighting for.
I think it's, you mentioned the 14th Amendment and its origins and the children of slaves, and it is absolutely appalling that the Solicitor General of the United States repeated a MAGA mantra in his Supreme Court argument that the 14th Amendment was only intended to apply to the children of slaves, despite the precedents and every time the issue has been presented. And there's just no basis for that, and it's wrong and it's contrary to conservative interpretation of the Constitution. It's contrary to the text of the Constitution, and it's contrary to reliance on decided cases.
Yeah, no, I was there at the argument. Obviously, you were listening as well. And what's clear, though, is, yes, I was not very surprised coming out of this Solicitor General, those arguments. He also dodged a number of whether or not he would commit to upholding the law of the Court of Appeals.
In general, yes, he said, in general.
But what I was struck by, Jim, is that I think, if I counted correctly, there will be a majority of justices on that court that will strike down the executive order on birthright citizenship on the merits. I mean, I think, in fact, they seem quite keen to be able to get to the merits because they feel that that is an overreach. And that's saying a lot, right? When you have 3 of the justices who were appointed by President Trump, who and I'm not a betting man, and I tend to be conservative because lawyers, our best work is to be thoughtful, prepare for the worst, and hope for the best. I still think on both of these big blockbuster cases, the one that Norm and I are doing on birthright citizenship, and then the one on Alien Enemies Act, which almost assuredly will be at the court next term, I don't think there's a way for us to lose those 2 cases. And I've said that out loud, even with this court, knowing them and knowing how much they break my heart on so many of the other issues. I think on those 2 issues, they're going to be hard-pressed to rule for the Trump administration.
I would have said that on 18 of the 20 cases that came on the shadow docket this term. So, Norm, the 3 branches of government, What can you tell us about that? Checks and balances. Do we have any checks and balances? The Congress just gave Trump a big vote of confidence on the big, beautiful bill.
We often talk about the American system of checks and balances in terms of Article 1, the Congress, where the MAGA majority has ceded power to Trump. Article 3, the judiciary, where the MAGA majority on the Roberts Court has ceded power to Trump. And Article 2, the executive, where Trump has gladly taken that power and more, much, much more. But there's really a fourth element of American checks and balances that has been very much in play and that I think we are going to see operating as a brake until the American people start coming to the rescue, as they already did in that Wisconsin race. Susan and I, of course, when we talk about Wisconsin, we do that in our C4 capacity. Like Anthony, we have our C3, and some of the work we do in our C4 capacity, including all of our Wisconsin work, some of our election protection work. We do some C3, some C4. And that fourth element, you could almost refer to them as a fourth branch, are the states. And what you've seen here in these cases have been an almost uninterrupted winning streak by states who are litigating, and in particular, state attorneys general. We sometimes represent the states and other government actors in litigation, and the states have a nearly uninterrupted winning streak. Sometimes we operate in parallel. In the big AmeriCorps case we won today, there's a separate state case, each of us seeking complementary relief to cover as many AmeriCorps programs as possible in the country. And I think when you look at that big map, when you look at the ultimate guardrail, we're talking about guardrails of democracy, you've heard it again and again, the ultimate guardrail, all of you, the American people, you'll be going to your court, the court of public opinion, polls, the only polls that ultimately matter, the election polls, to express a preference. We've seen a series of disproportionate choices that are being made that complement that state work in election cases, and in a sense, that's the ultimate check and balance. Susan and I know from our international work, far more entrenched autocratic regimes than the 6-month-old Trump administration have been peacefully and lawfully evicted by voters expressing their will. I was just looking at a poll today. We've talked a lot about immigration. I was looking, and you could almost think of the voters as the fifth branch in this, the ultimate check and balance to your question, Jim. I was looking at a poll today where Donald Trump has gone underwater. More people disagree than agree with his immigration policies because the overreach has been so grotesque. The litigation that Anthony has done, we are in some of these cases as well. It's the ultimate civil liberty. Anthony and the ACLU are really the leaders. But the litigation that has been done has helped illustrate that for the public, win or lose. So when I look at the big picture, nobody can guarantee which fork in the road we'll take. But there are plenty of reasons. Ultimately, over 300 million of them, the American people, they don't want, every indication is, they don't want what Trump is selling. And that, together with that fourth branch, the states, and with newly empowered minorities, what a difference 6 months make from how the minority in the House and the Senate were fighting back on January 20th to this pushback on the big, ugly bill. They did everything in their power. It was superb. So when I look at all of those elements, there is reason to be optimistic. Now we just have to keep putting that litigation sand in the gears, keep doing our thing, and hope that the American people, our ultimate guardrail, come through for us.
So on that triumph of optimism, we will open the meeting to questions. The audience may ask questions. There are microphones available so that everyone can hear. Please make your questions brief. Please make them questions. We'll know they're questions from the rising inflection in your voice. And our panelists, who are really good at answering questions, as you've seen, will do their very best to address what your concerns are.
Is this microphone on? It's on, all right. I wish I was an optimist. I'm not. I'm not a pessimist either. I'm a realist. I wish the courts had their own military, but they don't. I'm here for one reason, and that is I've been a supporter of the ACLU all my life, except for a brief interlude in the early and mid-1980s. But I am also now a full-time supporter, okay, and every month, actually. My question is this, and I hope this is short enough. I'm trying to do it that way. I maintain that the current lack of transparency, a lot of the issues we're facing right now, began when Barbara Bernstein, former executive director of the Nassau chapter of the ACLU, refused to pursue a stymied FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act request, back in 1984. After a few modest attempts and at getting justice from the Justice Department, getting files released, she didn't think it was worthwhile. She didn't pursue it any longer.
Okay.
All right? The bottom line is this. Having terminated the investigation, I should have had access to the files, the Justice Department, for the investigation I had asked them to begin 8 years earlier. Okay?
Well,
Under Reagan, the last thing we heard from him was that the files from the Justice Department were destroyed. The investigative files for the Postal Service investigation were destroyed.
Okay.
How do you think that
let me
has
thank
applied
you
to
for your
this today?
question. And I
You
want
think in any way it has kicked, it has contributed to what we're facing today? I'm sorry I stepped away from the microphone, but I taught in the Bronx. I thought you might still hear me.
No worries. Why don't we continue the conversation separately? I see you right in front. I'm right in front. I'm not going anywhere. I'm half a mile down the road.
I look forward
would
to
love to talk to you more about it. I know Barbara Bernstein. I don't know that particular case. There are thousands of them. Sometimes we get it right. Sometimes we miss the ball, but I promise you I would like to talk to you more about it. Thank you for your support.
Thank you.
And stick
Okay,
with us.
next question.
Thank you very much.
Please keep it brief so everyone will have a chance.
So the panel should know that many people in this room have been demonstrating. Thousands of us on the East End have been demonstrating. And for those of you who don't know, on July 17th, you can go to Port Jefferson, you can go to East Hampton, you can go to Hampton Bays, you can go to Sag Harbor. All you have to do is go online to Indivisible, put in your zip code, and you can join people. Many of them are here right now, have been doing it. That's not a question, that's an announcement.
Even though it wasn't a question, I will say that July 17th is our demonstrations in honor of the memory of John Lewis. I was very privileged to call him a friend. I know Anthony knew him well. And we're calling him the Good Trouble mobilization. Peaceful, lawful, vigorous. So those mobilizations have been a very important part of giving hope and of demonstrating the integrity of American democracy.
Yes, sir.
This is for Norman. I know you are a strong believer that no man is above the law.
Or woman.
You always, yes, man and woman. And you always mention it on TV shows, in your articles. But what happened in Washington? Why do we have people who broke the law, who did everything they can to break it even more, and they are still not being punished? And you know who I'm trying to.
I think I can guess who you're
Yes,
referring
thank
to. That is one of the oldest questions in human civilization. How do bad people get away again and again? I believe that the answer to the question is in a famous colloquy between Henry Kissinger and Zhou Enlai. And Kissinger said to Zhou, what do you think of the French Revolution? And the Chinese leader responded, I don't know yet, too soon to tell. I still believe that there will be a comeuppance. Many of the people who did wrong, I worked on the disbarments of many of the lawyers from 2020. We just got a disbarment here in New York State of Ken Chesbrough, of one of those lawyers who pled guilty. Civil litigation is still going on against Donald Trump. But if we want to see justice done, we now recognize that we are going to have to collectively start by turning out, supporting organizations like the ACLU, like Democracy Defenders, turning out for the mobilizations, turning out at the polls. If we don't do that, we'll never get an answer to your question. So I remain hopeful, and we do have these interim, these lower down people who have faced justice, including some who've pled guilty or who have lost their bar licenses. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, especially Anthony and everybody for giving us hope. We need hope in order to keep going, and I think you know that, and so thank you so much for this. I have a different question. I read in the Times today about Ketanji Jackson and how she's been giving other short pieces in the court, but that isn't really, as they said, that it's not really related, or it's related to the case that's going on, but it's more in a way that regular people might be able to understand what's happening. And I thought if that is really what she's trying to do, it would be amazing, because so many people who don't know very much about the courts, if you can get it in the way that they can understand it, it will help us bring more people in with us. So I just wondered if that was something that you all have seen or maybe can see, or whatever, what would bring more people in.
I mean, I agree with you. I think that is amazing that she's doing that, and I feel fortunate to be flanked by two lawyers who are also some of the best communicators about these issues, because as Anthony said, some of the legalese, and it's hard for people to access, but for people to understand that these cases and the complicated laws that the Trump administration is trying to exploit, what we're really talking about is people's lives, and the Trump administration is trying to disenfranchise the most vulnerable amongst us. And you need lawyers who are able to communicate to people and have them understand what is really at stake. It is not just cases before judges, lawyers arguing it out. What we're talking about is how do we protect the most vulnerable amongst us, and how do we tell those stories? We need to get out of the big abstract conversations about democracy and rule of law and be talking about, what the ACLU and Anthony does is that we are championing people, that everybody born in this country should have the same access. They should have the same rights. My daughter is Irish Catholic, African American, Muslim, and we were going to, product of America, and we were going to vote, and she said, Mom, you should go. but Daddy and I should stay home because it is not safe for people with brown skin like Daddy and I to go with you to the courts. The police might hurt us. And it just broke my heart. That's what I'm fighting for, that my daughter should be able to go to good school. She should have the same rights as every other kid. And they're trying to take us back in time where she will not have the same things. And I'm not a lawyer, but I am so fortunate to work with some of the best who I know are fighting for my daughter, for other daughters like her, for ones that don't speak English, who need champions. And that's, if Ketanji Brown Jackson didn't do that, the other lawyers, that's why rule of law and defending rule of law and our courts and the profession, and that is what the Supreme Court is unraveling for themselves, is the esteem within which they're held. But that's what that's what all of us can be doing, is telling those stories of who we're fighting for.
Well, Susan, I hope you're flanked by 3 lawyers who are trying to make legal concepts clear to people. I thought that Ketanji Brown Jackson wrote a magnificent dissent. I thought it was certainly one that was filled with legal principle. It was one that expressed the emotion of her position, and it was one that could be understood by the vast majority of people if they read it or read of it, because she was really saying we have to make the law, particularly a law this clear as birthright citizenship, work for all people. I thought it was outrageous that Barrett scolded her and denounced her. In her opinion, it was needless, it was gratuitous, and in fact, Barrett's decision, I thought, was full of holes in her analogy to the neighbor who plays, think of Richard and Patricia, who plays loud music late at night. They don't, but they're our next door neighbor. That one neighbor can get an injunction and it benefits everyone on the block. So in the context of birthright citizenship, where the right is so clear, why can't it benefit everyone in the country? That there is absolute commonality of the principle, and it was an outrageous decision. It had, they just bought into this game that was evolved by the Solicitor General of addressing the remedy without addressing the right. We have another one. We have another question. I'm sorry.
Hi. So you say we have this court of opinion, a court of public opinion. That's made up of people, not robots, not AI, not corporations. And yet we have this case, Citizens United from 2010, which strips so much of the power of the people and empowers corporations to really insidiously take over. And how do we overturn that kind of law that doesn't work for the people?
Well, I had the responsibility of going and telling President Obama when the Supreme Court asked for re-argument in the Citizens United case. I was the one who went into the Oval Office. I said, this is going to be the end of campaign finance regulation. That first hour when we got the re-argument, as part of my White House job, we came very close to getting a fix, a partial fix. There are legislative fixes. One of the legislative fixes that you could do is an opening that was left in the opinion, much more transparency about the money. We are still pushing for that. There's a series of bills. We talked about what we must do the next time we have a trifecta. We have to move it's called the For the People Act, It's a package of democracy reforms. I think we have to move it. We've just been through part of that. We've just been through the foundation for part of that. We just went through the reconciliation process. You don't need 60 votes in the Senate. You only need 51 votes to move budgetary matters. I think we should, I've written a lot about this, I think we should have another exception that would have allowed that to move. Democracy reconciliation. You can pass that where for issues essential to our democracy, like fixing Citizens United, you can have a 51 vote margin. It's an exception to the filibuster. I think we came close on that too in the Senate. I think the next time there's a trifecta, you are going to see an exception made to address the heinous ills. I don't think I agreed on every single aspect of this with everybody, and there will be a fight about it the next time around. But that's where I would start. The constitutional issues obviously are tougher. You have a 6-vote MAGA majority on that court that is not going to change the constitutional precepts. There's a lot that we can do statutorily. And you know what else is interesting? There's a lot of campaign finance reform that you can do and that is being done in democracy reform at the state and local level, like banning all forms of foreign money. That can be done much more efficaciously, and there's referenda on that. So there's more you can do.
Norma, what is the trifecta, as you've used the term? I always think of it as a bet I always lose at the racetrack.
President, House, Senate. If you have both houses of a legislature and you have the executive, like in the states where we have trifectas, the governor, both houses of the legislature, we've been able to move a lot of very important legislation. That's why they wanted to ban state AI regulation for 10 years. Fortunately, the Senate came to its senses on that.
Okay, another question.
I actually think this is a good follow-up question because we've been talking a lot about the 3 branches of government, but I felt like we didn't talk too much about the legislative branch. And my sense, and you could tell me if you disagree, but my sense is that the heavy reliance on executive orders and the judiciary branch is because the legislative branch has just been, lawmakers are failing to actually legislate things. So I'm just wondering if you agree with that interpretation that the heavy reliance on those 2 other branches is symptomatic of a faltering legislative branch, and what kind of historical situation has led us to this point?
I mean, I would say right now, right now Democrats are obviously in a very difficult situation. You know, Norm and I and our other sister organizations spent a lot of time talking with friends and allies on the Hill and with the big bad bill. I think as far as the Democrats did everything they could to mitigate some of the worst elements of it, but there's not a lot that can be done in the legislative branch right now from a Democratic perspective. Norm, I don't know if you want to follow, or Anthony on.
No, I would say that we haven't seen the next blitz that's going to come. Part of my job is to try to anticipate what's on the future so I can get ready now for what's coming down the pike. We were ready for these executive orders, right? We had spent, the ACLU and colleagues like Norm's and Susan's group had spent months preparing for these executive orders. Literally, they were lawsuits drafted. That's why you could send on the day that the executive orders were signed. The second blitz we are now in the middle of is this deportation blitz, where they are ratcheting up the machinery of the Department of Homeland Security to expel many more people from this country. And we can talk more about that in another question, but that's, I think, we're in the middle of that one. We're seeing the ratcheting up of numbers and their efforts to deport people. The third blitz, which I think will come as soon as they're back in session, will be a legislative blitz. They're not dumb. They have the 2 branches of Congress We know already from sources who still talk to us that they're planning other legislation to come down the pike. We can anticipate a new bill on immigration, right? They're going to try to reform the nation's immigration laws beyond the enforcement and border security efforts. They are working on that bill already. We can anticipate all sorts of bills around voting rights. They are going to try to enact a nationwide requirement that you demonstrate photo ID before you vote. For a lot of us who have driver's licenses in our pockets, we don't think that's very hard. For a lot of folks who live in rural communities, or the elderly or younger people, the requirement to demonstrate photo identification is a way to purge certain groups off the polls who vote a certain way, right? It is all about culling the herd of Democratic voters. And so I think we can anticipate laws coming down the pike on photo ID, citizenship requirements. I think there are all sorts of other kind of nefarious laws that they're going to try to codify. A lot of the cases that we've been working on in executive orders, where we're saying that the executive branch doesn't have the authority, that it's overreaching. If they codify it legislatively, we lose a major part of some of our arguments. So I'm very much worried about the legislative blitz. Now, the midterms are just a year and 2 months away, right? So slow it all up, right? Jam it up. Turn up at those site visits, at those district offices. Make sure we jam them up. Sow the seeds of discontent among the Republicans. I don't really talk to a lot of Democrats anymore. I spend a lot of time calling and working relationships with Republicans. You know, we can cultivate Rand Paul to pull away on some of these issues. Susan Collins, if any of you are engaged in Maine or have homes up there. Lisa Murkowski, critical vote. There are many of these decisions, they have gone the wrong way for us, but we have to make sure that we sow the seeds of discontent in their house so that they cannot get everything done.
Okay, quickly, we have about 3 minutes to go, so maybe we can take 2 questions at once here and 2 questions at once here.
Try to make this quick. I guess as we're talking about all these kind of structural changes, I'm wondering if the system itself just kind of feels inherently flawed, and if you feel like, what does a true democracy look like to you, and do you feel like we've ever had that, or will we?
Okay, second one over here.
And my question is, South Korea seemed to face a similar situation, and their answer was to sue the people surrounding the executive. And I'm wondering if you have plans to do that, or is there some way you could go about doing that? So, thank you.
My question is, when we have seen these tech billionaires immediately align themselves under the Trump administration, how can we truly mobilize and inform the population to get to the polls?
One other question?
Oh, yes, thank you. Yes, I'm the mother of 2 grown kids that I raised out here. And Susan, you moved me about your child. And I have a child who became transgender and had to move not only from Long Island, but from New York to find safety in another state. I have another child who has become a professor at Pratt of film and is devoting herself toward the homeless and she calls them the unhoused. Homeless is not correct anymore. And also those who are in need of food. And she devotes herself and her students every weekend to go out to clothe those who need it, migrants and such, in homeless shelters. What's sad is my child, who is transgender, was just attacked by a homeless person. So here we bring it back around. Having moved from here and not feeling at all welcome, by the way, in his hometown, Amagansett, East Hampton, because he would stick out like a sore thumb. So he can't really come home again, which breaks any mother's heart, I'm sure. And then, Anthony, I was moved by your 3-bucket analogy, and you mentioned transgender in one of them. So I guess this is just not so much a question as a plea to focus somewhat on the situations that I just mentioned, which are quite a few. Thank you for your work, all of you. It's great.
Thank you for sharing that.
How do you want us to organize it, Jim? You're the boss.
Boss, do you want to start?
No, let Norman
Norm?
go.
Yes, we've never had a true democracy, but we know from, Susan and I know from our work in many countries around the world, that democracy can function better. It's not only, there are other examples, it's not only South Korea, Brazil, they very effectively dealt with a tyrant. As imperfect as our democracy is, I have faith that I wrote this in my column last weekend for the Contrarian, that like a forest fire that burns through, but then there's a new growth, that the reaction to Donald Trump, if we make the right choices, all of us as the American people, that the reaction to Donald Trump, it may be catastrophic, or it may lead to new opportunities for us as a nation. And I'm hoping and praying and working with every ounce of my being for the latter, and to attain that American democracy that we've never yet really achieved.
Anyone else want to take a swing?
Yeah, I'll jump in, let Anthony go. I think one way I like to think about it is think of democracy as a verb, not a noun, that it is a practice. It is something like meditation. It's something that there's not a perfect end state. It is inherently imperfect, but that's also what makes it beautiful, that we have to participate. You can't just sit back and think, oh, isn't democracy awesome? It requires a lot of people, and it is only when people participate and show up and fight for it that it can be going towards its best self. So we have not ever been a perfect democracy, nor will we probably ever be. We should always be working to improve. The African American side of my family, they feel more hopeful actually many days than I do, because they said their family has come so far, that they were slaves, and then his parents were able to go to college, and he and I were able to get married as an interracial couple, and they see this as a setback in a much longer arc of progress that they have seen for their ancestors. So they are much more positive, and they kind of take some of the disappointments and the outrage of the Trump administration much more in stride than I do. The other thing I would say is, I was formerly a diplomat focused on human rights and democracy issues around the world. And in those days, it felt more like we were lecturing, as if we were coming up from on high on top of the hill and telling everybody, here's how you can be a great democracy. We have been humbled. It is deeply humbling where we are right now. Democracy has not been delivering for everybody. We can talk about how to fight against authoritarianism coming our way, but we do need to do the hard work to figure out how to make it work better for more people, or it is not self-evident that democracy is going to continue for the next 50 years. It does need to be improved, and that is the humbling, hard lesson that we are going to have to learn the hard way. I'll pause there and let Anthony.
I'll just pick up, exactly. I'll pick up where Susan left off. I mean, to your the first question about this imperfect union, you have to go back to the original text, right? In order to create a more perfect union, we hold right? It's the act of creating from the imperfect, right? Never was there a perfect moment. That moment is what we are striving for, and we make it perfect by continuing to hold these truths to be self-evident and to make them real. The second point about holding people accountable, I believe in karma. I'm not a Hindu, but if I were, I think it's a very good concept. I think the karma's coming. I watch the Tesla stock drop every day, and I think that's karma. Third question about how we get voters out. I think that happens with a community of people and the relationships, the rapport. We can't just expect people to just on their own turn up and vote. We have to have these hard conversations around dining room tables and grab people. I think the fourth question about her child who's transgender, that's why we fight for transgender rights. It's 1.5 million people. It's the quintessential powerless group in a democracy. The whole role of the Equal Protection Clause is to protect individuals who can't rely upon the political process for protection or power. And that's why you stand up for the little guy, right? Literally. And I think it's a no-brainer from a civil liberties perspective. I decide what I speak, what God I worship, if any God at all, with whom I associate. I decide what gender I identify with. How dare they impose their gender ideology on individuals who have the full autonomy of their own personhood to decide. It's the same issue around abortion. Finally, I close with, people ask, how do you stay hopeful? And I am hopeful, and I guess I stay hopeful because I am busy. Hope is not the precursor to action. That you'll end up just becoming a spectator. Action is the precursor to hope. I promise you, if you get involved in your local community, to the Ladies' Home Improvement Society, to the Soup Kitchen, to any of the groups that are out here, if you just volunteer, in the face of such mendacity, in the face of such meanness of spirit, of such bad faith, just simple acts of generosity, of kindness, of propinquity, of love, a smile, an encouragement. You drive by the Riverhead Supply Store, wave at the guys, right? You know what I'm talking about, who are in front of the train station, the day laborers who run the risk of being picked up by INS because they're out there to help us clean our houses or our yards or do our work. Show that warmth of that human spirit in that face of such meanness, such corruption, such mendacity. Just the human spirit soaring is the greatest response. And that you can do on your own.
Well, just to sum up and close and inject a note of optimism, Churchill said, "America always gets it right after it's tried everything else."